Before the current movie rating system, there was the Legion of Decency. The Legion was created by the church in 1933, and its goal was to rate films for moral content based on a simple letter system. The list of movies is very long, but here are some of the most well-known films that were condemned by the church. Let's get into it.
Fantasy, sci-fi, nostalgia, rerun zone.
The Exorcist, 1973. Let's start off with the elephant in the room, The Exorcist. That film really turned heads, literally, in 1973. Directed by William Friedkin, this landmarked horror film tells the chilling tale of a young girl possessed by a demon and the desperate battle between good and evil. The Legion of Decency, those guardians of cinematic purity, saw it as a how-to manual for demonic possession. They were quick to condemn this film, saying it was a dangerous and sinful assault on the senses. They were horrified by its graphic content, from the projectile vomiting to the unsettling profanities spewed by a possessed child. To them, The Exorcist wasn't just a horror movie, it was a full-on spiritual crisis. Audiences were terrified at the time. In fact, some left theaters with a mix of horror and nausea. Of course, today, what once caused fainting spells is now seen as a classic piece of cinema. The Legion's outrage has faded into obscurity, while The Exorcist remains a cultural touchstone in the horror film genre. Dawn of the Dead, 1978. You could probably see this one coming next. It's Dawn of the Dead, George Romero's 1978 classic film, following up on his brilliant Night of the Living Dead. In this one, zombies decide that the best place for a reunion is the local shopping mall. The Legion of Decency, those guardians of moral purity, condemned the film for its satirical bite at society, not to mention the literal bites on the screen. They probably thought it was a documentary on the decline of civilization. Back in the day, this film was the epitome of shock horror, but it's now looked at with nostalgic affection with its outdated, flesh-eating special effects. And the notion that malls could be the center of societal collapse? Heaven forbid! Pink Flamingos, 1972. Directed by John Waters in 1972, Pink Flamingos is an underground spectacle where Divine and her crew of societal rejects engage in a battle of bad taste to be crowned the filthiest people alive. If the Legion of Decency had survived the shock, it would have probably needed a mass exorcism after this one. They saw it not just as a film, but as a direct affront to their moral compass, declaring it the cinematic equivalent of original sin, with every frame an act of defiance against decency. Today, Pink Flamingos is considered a cult classic. It's like that wild uncle at family gatherings who was once scandalous, but now just makes for great stories. The shock of this movie has mellowed somewhat into a nostalgic appreciation for its audacity, with modern audiences often viewing it through the lens of campy nostalgia, marveling at its unapologetic embrace of the bizarre. The Outlaw, 1943. This was the film that made a star out of Jane Russell's cleavage and gave the Legion of Decency a collective case of the vapors. Directed by the ever-modest Howard Hughes, who just happened to design a special bra for his leading lady, this Western isn't so much about the Wild West as it is about, the Wild Chest. The plot? Something to do with Billy the Kid and Pat Garrett, but let's be honest, no one was watching for the story. The Legion of Decency took one look at Russell's ample assets and slapped a big fat condemnation on the film faster than you can say bustier. According to them, The Outlaw was less about gunfights and more about, shall we say, chestnuts roasting on an open fire? Public outrage? Hardly. The scandal only made the film more popular, proving once again that nothing sells like sex, especially when you tell people they're not allowed to see it. La Dolce Vita, 1960. This film made scandal look chic and sent the Legion of Decency into a full-blown crisis. Federico Fellini's masterpiece is a dizzying tour through the decadent nightlife of Rome, starring Marcello Mastroianni as the ultimate detached observer, drifting through a world where glamour and emptiness go hand in hand. It's like a week-long bender with the jet set, where everyone looks fabulous but no one seems to have a soul. The Legion of Decency took one glance at the hedonistic revelry and said, absolutely not. To them, the Dolce Vita wasn't just a film, it was a 3-hour indictment of everything they stood against, namely, fun. They were horrified by its portrayal of moral decay, promiscuity, and a general lack of good, clean Catholic guilt. But while the Legion was busy writing scathing reviews, audiences were busy flocking to the theaters. Today, the Dolce Vita is hailed as a cinematic classic, a dazzling exploration of the hollowness behind the high life. Baby Doll, 1956. In 1956, this film made the Legion of Decency break out in a sweat, and writer Tennessee Williams chuckle in delight. Directed by Elia Kazan, this steamy slice of Southern Gothic drama stars Carol Baker as the titular baby doll, a childlike bride caught in a twisted love triangle involving her much older husband and his scheming rival. The plot is thick with lust, jealousy, and enough sexual tension to make a magnolia tree wilt. The Legion of Decency, always quick to spot a moral catastrophe, took one look at Baby Doll's suggestive nightgown and her not-so-innocent behavior, and promptly slapped a condemnation on the film. According to them, Baby Doll was a ticking time bomb of moral decay, ready to corrupt anyone who dared to watch. They were especially incensed by the film's provocative themes and Baker's Lolita-esque performance, which they feared would lead to the moral unraveling of society. Of course, the public reaction was just the opposite. The scandal only fueled curiosity, and what the Legion condemned, audiences embraced. The Moon is Blue, 1953. The Moon is Blue is the rom-com that had the Legion of Decency blushing harder than a debutante at her first dance. Directed by Otto Preminger, this film dared to break the unspoken rules of Hollywood with a plot that revolves around a young woman, played by Maggie McNamara, who juggles the attentions of two older men without ever losing her sense of self or her virginity. It's light, it's breezy, and gasp, it even uses the word virgin. The Legion of Decency, always on the lookout for moral slip-ups, pounced on The Moon is Blue like a cat on a canary. They were scandalized by the film's frank discussion of sex and its casual approach to relationships, which they believed was a one-way ticket to moral ruin. The film was condemned not for what it showed, but for what it dared to talk about. In the Legion's eyes, the mere mention of seduction and virtue was enough to send America spiraling into depravity. But of course, the public ate it up and found the whole thing rather amusing. Far from being scandalized, audiences flocked to see what all the fuss was about. Some Like It Hot, 1959. This incredibly funny film took cross-dressing, crime, and comedy, tossed them in a blender, and served up one of the most beloved movies of all time. If you've never seen it, you really should check it out. Directed by Billy Wilder, it stars Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon as two musicians on the run from the mob, who disguise themselves as women and join an all-female band. Enter Marilyn Monroe as the sultry Sugar Cane, and you got a recipe for chaos, laughs, and of course, a good dose of scandal. The Legion of Decency took one look at this cocktail of gender-bending hijinks and sexual innuendo and declared it a moral catastrophe. Condemning it for its immoral situations and perceived endorsement of promiscuity, Some Like It Hot was seen as a direct assault on traditional gender roles and decency itself. The Legion was practically in cardiac arrest, but the film's wit, charm, and sheer audacity made it an instant classic. The French Line, 1954. Here's another movie that proved that Jane Russell didn't need a lasso to rope in controversy. In this musical extravaganza, Russell stars as a Texan oil heiress who goes undercover on a cruise ship to find true love without the baggage of her massive fortune. What could possibly go wrong? Well, according to the Legion of Decency, everything. The film was a romp full of catchy tunes and colorful sets. But let's not kid ourselves. Most people were there for Jane Russell, especially in 3D. Yes, that's right, the movie was shot in glorious 3D, and it wasn't the scenic ocean views that had audiences' eyes popping. Russell's revealing wardrobe and suggestive dance numbers were a little too much for the Legion of Decency. They condemned this film for being an unapologetic display of, well, curves. Of course, all this moral outrage only made the film more popular. The French Line is a fun, fluffy musical that knew exactly what it was selling, and sold it with a wink and a smile. And God Created Woman, 1956. This is the film that introduced the world to Brigitte Bardot, and made the Legion of Decency wish they had a direct line to the Almighty. This sultry French drama wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural earthquake. Bardot stars as Juliette, a free-spirited young woman whose unabashed sexuality sends shockwaves through a small town, and apparently through the Legion's office, too. Juliette is caught in a love triangle that's less about love and more about lust, freedom, and rebellion. Bardot's portrayal of a woman who lived life on her own terms was just too much for the Legion of Decency. They quickly condemned the film for its overt sensuality and lack of traditional moral values. To them, Juliette wasn't just a character, she was a one-woman apocalypse ready to bring down the pillars of virtue. Of course, the public was entranced. Bardot became an international sex symbol overnight, and the film's reputation only grew from there. Today, And God Created Woman is seen as a landmark in cinema, not just for its daring content, but for its celebration of the female anatomy. The Legion may have wrung their hands, but Bardot and the film danced their way into history, proving that sometimes the most dangerous thing that a woman can do is to just be herself. Kiss Me Stupid, 1964. This was the film that made Billy Wilder the ultimate prankster in Hollywood, gleefully thumbing his nose at decency and daring the Legion to do something about it. This bawdy comedy stars Dean Martin as a womanizing crooner and Ray Walston as a paranoid songwriter who concocts a harebrained scheme to tempt Martin with a stand-in wife, played by Kim Novak, to save his marriage and get his song sung. If it sounds ridiculous, well, that's because it is, and gloriously so. The Legion of Decency, however, wasn't laughing. They condemned Kiss Me Stupid faster than a mother could cover her child's ears. What was their issue? Well, the film's unbridled celebration of sexual innuendo, adultery, and, most scandalously, the notion that a wife could be loaned out as part of a scheme. For the Legion, this wasn't just immoral, it was outright dangerous and a comedic cavalcade of corruption that could lead audiences straight to the gates of hell. But Wilder, ever the provocateur, knew exactly what he was doing. The film's sharp wit and unabashed naughtiness have since earned it a cult following. Kiss Me Stupid might have been condemned, but it's also been celebrated as a bold, if cheeky satire of American sexual mores. Gilda, 1946. This is the film that catapulted Rita Hayworth into the stratosphere of Hollywood stardom and made censors wish they could ban a smoldering glance. This film noir is all about danger, desire, and of course, the unforgettable Gilda. Hayworth plays the titular femme fatale, a woman whose mere presence drives men to madness and whose sultry striptease left audiences and censors in need of a cold shower. The Legion of Decency took one look at Gilda's suggestive shimmy and declared the film a threat to moral integrity. Condemned for its sexual innuendo and Hayworth's tantalizing performance, Gilda was seen as a piece of cinematic sin wrapped up in silk and sequins. The Legion wasn't just worried about the provocative dance, oh no, they were petrified of the film's portrayal of a woman who wielded her sexuality like a weapon, sharp, dangerous, and deadly. But for all their hand-wringing, the public couldn't get enough of Gilda. Today, the film is a classic, a masterclass in film noir that simmers with tension and oozes with style. The Pawnbroker, 1964. This searing drama stars Rod Steiger as Sol Nazarman, a Holocaust survivor running a pawn shop in Harlem, haunted by his past and disconnected from his present. It's a film about trauma, loss, and the unbearable weight of memory, delivered with a rawness that left audiences and censors reeling. The Legion of Decency condemned The Pawnbroker, not for its profound exploration of human suffering, but for its daring to include brief scenes of nudity and stark depictions of sexual themes. In their eyes, these moments overshadowed the film's deeper message, making it unfit for public consumption. They missed the point entirely, of course. The nudity wasn't gratuitous. It was a painful reminder of the dehumanization that Saul endured and the brokenness that now defined his existence. But while the Legion was horrified, critics and audiences saw The Pawnbroker for what it was, a groundbreaking, courageous piece of cinema. Today, it's hailed as a film that doesn't just depict human suffering, but demands that we confront it. Well, we're going to wrap this list up here, because this list could literally go on for hours. But I hope you take the time to actually watch some of these great films if you haven't already seen them, and keep their memory alive. It's worth preserving these treasures and passing them on to the younger generation, and maybe get them away from social media for a few hours. This is Rich from Rerun Zone, signing off. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you next time.